Welcome to Before You Vote. I'm Mike Broomhead. The CW7 program is here to help you, the voter, understand the 2024 primary election. Now, never before has a former president been charged with a felony in U.S. history. At the same time, the current president, Biden, has issued an executive order addressing the asylum seekers at the border. What does this all mean to you, the voter? Today, we're taking a deep dive into the latest news surrounding the 2024 presidential election and the front-running candidates. Now, let's take a look at some of the latest headlines surrounding these topics. Let's start with wildfires in Arizona. If you're new to Arizona, this is fire season. We had a wet winter, which means we had a lot of growth. As that growth dries out in this extreme heat, it becomes a very serious fire hazard. Whether you're a target shooter, make sure the ground is clear, or you are someone that is using equipment like a grinder, you've got to make sure the underbrush is completely cleared away. One spark, it really is just one spark. It's obvious, don't throw cigarettes out the window, but I would also go as far as saying chains on a trailer. Make sure they're not dragging in the street. We all have to work together. There have already been 4 fires or more reported in Arizona. The season is expected to be very, very risky. We all have to do our best to keep the fires down. Also, let's talk about another big issue, which is the 34 felony convictions for former President Donald Trump. Of course, the Trump campaign has said that this was all rigged, this was all politically motivated, that he is 100% innocent, and he is also going to challenge this in the appeal process. The others are saying it. President Biden has already called him a convicted felon, and a lot of voters are saying that he should step out of the race based on these convictions for the good of the country. What will the voters say in November, and what will this say to the voters, and what role will it play? We'll talk to Chuck Coughlin about that in just a little while. Also, we have to address the border. Here in Arizona, the House of Representatives passed HCR 2060. It now goes to the ballot for the voters in November. You will decide whether it becomes law. There are 3 elements. The most talked about element of this is, of course, the issue of border enforcement. Can local law enforcement, should local law enforcement be enforcing immigration laws? That's a big question. Do they have the resources to do it? Do they have the space in the jails and the manpower to enforce it? That's a big question. But also in this piece of legislation is enhanced sentencing for fentanyl dealers and fentanyl distributors. There is also an element about businesses and business owners and using E-Verify in order to make sure that they're not hiring people that are in the country illegally. You as a voter will decide in November whether or not this becomes law and alters our Constitution here in the state of Arizona. Also, President Biden, in the executive order that was passed or that he has signed this week, what that means to the voters here in Arizona and around the country, because is this too little too late? These are also topics we're going to talk to our expert, Chuck Coughlin, not just what it means, but what does it mean about the election? How will it alter people's choices or how they view the different candidates? Is this too little too late? Up next, analyst Chuck Coughlin from HighGround does join us to talk about how Donald Trump's campaign could be affected by the guilty verdict. Plus, later in the show, Mike Noble with Noble Predictive Insights will share the latest data of who's ahead in the 2024 Arizona Senate race in our Tracking Arizona segment. It's a show you're not going to want to miss. It's Before You Vote. We're going to be back here on CW7 Arizona in exactly 60 seconds. Welcome back to Before You Vote. Getting the opinions on some of the bigger news stories and what's going to happen. Joining us is Chuck Coughlin. You've been around politics a while. I don't want to talk about how many years.
You used to have hair too, right?
Yeah, well, me too.
Yeah,
me
exactly.
too. I want to talk about a couple of things and the impact it's going to have on the election. And I want to start with first the Trump conviction.
Yeah.
You've talked a lot about this. Perception, the voters en masse don't seem to really want either one of the candidates.
Yeah.
But when it comes down to making the choice, how are they going to choose? How much does this conviction impact that choice for the average voter?
For the average voter, very little. I think most of the electorate, as we've talked about before, is pretty locked in. they're on one team or the other team.
Even independent voters.
I think so. It comes down to a very small percentage of the electorate on the presidential cycle where they're really focused down to the nitty-gritty. I think most people at this stage of the election, given the thermometer of this race, have migrated to where they're going to be. It's going to be a small percentage of late deciders, low information voters. And this is the conviction is going to be part of, like, I've called it like the pain in the room. It's going to be the perception people have on what Biden will be saying about him, his approach to civil liberties, his lawlessness, those types of things, and making people concerned about that. And Trump, on his narrative, will be saying, it's all rigged. It's the deep state, it's everybody against me, and it's going to motivate very small portions of the low information electorate.
I saw two things this week. One of them was an op-ed piece from a Republican woman in the USA Today that said Republican voters can say that this was a political hatchet job, so to speak, but acknowledge that he's a horrible candidate. The other side was the Wall Street Journal piece that said, behind the scenes, President Biden is slipping. When people make their decision, is that what they're going to look at? Which of these is the one I can tolerate more? Is that really it?
Or which do I dislike less?
Right.
Because I've heard so many people say to me, can we do better? But this is what it's going to be, and it's going to come down to that. And I think those are the things that are going to, these very small issues, and the cycle's still maturing. All of these things are still going to be perceptionally still there to shape the electorate.
But is it ever going to be just about the issues? Is it going to be which one of these two guys is better to help get inflation down and get the economy going? Which of these two guys is really going to be able to get Congress to do something about the border? Is that coming into play, or is this really just going to be about this personality conflict that we continue to fight about?
If I'm Trump, I want it on the personality conflict. I want it in that space. I want to have this negative narrative about the Biden administration. A negative narrative is a suppressive narrative. It'll turn electoral turnout down, smaller turnout, because in a presidential cycle, younger voters tend to turn out around everybody else. Those younger voters tend to be more leaning towards the Democratic side. So his narrative is going to suppress turnout. That's what he wants it about. If I'm Biden, I want it back on the issues. I want it back on who do you trust to make the world better for you, and try and reanimate what he's done. The infrastructure bill, how he's done pretty well on inflation, although food and gas are still affecting everybody. How the national coalitions, freedom, individual liberty, what the country stands for.
It's funny you say that, because I've said exactly the opposite on my show, which I love about these conversations, because in the perception of as much as people are suffering under inflation, as bad as the border has gotten, Trump would want to say, remember how good it was when I was president. And the other issue for Biden would love to point to 34 convictions and continue down that road. So I love the opposite perspective.
I don't think it's valuable for the Democrats to go there, because the value of an aspirational narrative, can we do better, generally leads to younger voters and more aspirational voters that want the country to do better. Okay. And that is going to be, in my book, that leads towards a Democratic narrative, whereas Trump is just going to be about the negative narrative.
All right, well, what I want to do, if you don't mind, I want to talk about the border. We'll talk about the Biden executive order and 2060 here in Arizona, and how that's going to play a role. This is why I have him in here, because of the point of view of somebody that's been doing this for a very long time. We'll come back here in just a moment and talk border stuff. Coming up, will Kerry Lake and Ruben Gallego go head-to-head in the Senate race? We're taking a look at the polls next. Then later in the show, we're taking a look at Arizona's attempt to handle illegal border crossings and how you are a part of the decision. This is Before You Vote. All right, welcome back. It's our Tracking Arizona segment, and once again joining us, the CEO of Noble Predictive Insights, Mike Noble. Thanks again, Mike.
Hey, thanks for having me, Mike.
This week, I want to take a look at the Arizona Senate race, and let's start with the Republican primary. By most indicators, people are saying Kari Lake is going to be the nominee, but there is still hope for Mark Lamb, even though he's far behind. His numbers seem to be like he's got a chance here, right?
Yeah, he's got a chance right now, but to your point, yeah, the window's closing. I mean, we're about a month away from early voting beginning. So, I mean, the election's basically here. And Mark Lamb is currently down more than 2-1 to Kari Lake. There are enough undecideds out there to potentially make a move. But whatever his strategy is right now, he needs to absolutely pivot and do something else because his numbers have been the exact same since last quarter. And Kari Lake actually dropped about 7-8 points since the last poll due to a self-inflicted wound with that defamation case.
So let's take a look. When you look at this chart and you look at where the favorability, unfavorability looks, Mark Lamb is more popular with Republican voters than Kari Lake. What does that tell you?
It tells you that, one, it's mind-blowing because politics has unequivocally changed, is that when you look at among Republicans, his net favorability or his image, currently Mark Lamb is considered more favorable among Republicans than Kari Lake is, but yet is losing by more than 2-1 in the primary. And what is also interesting to look at is that among the general electorate, so all voters, when you're looking as a whole, Kari Lake is incredibly defined. So there's only about 12-14% that don't have an opinion of her. And overall, she's about -6 in her net fav. So she's very defined and underwater, whereas Mark Lamb is much more positive or has a lot more greens and has more room to grow since, 30-35% don't have an opinion. So when it comes to who is stronger for the general electorate, it's pretty clear Mark Lamb is the better product to put forward for the Republicans. The question is, who are they going to choose to come out of this primary?
And when you look at the general election and you see that she is lagging about 10 points behind Ruben Gallego, does that give more credibility for a chance for Lamb to jump ahead as a more credible and viable candidate in the general?
Absolutely. I mean, that's absolutely the case that's been here. And really the takeaway that we've been seeing is that Republicans, it's not that the state's been moving more blue, it's actually the state leans to the right. If you were to color code us, we'd be magenta, the lightest shade of red. It is the type of Republicans that are getting put up from the primary. Are they more traditional Republicans or are they more of these populist farther right ones? And at the end of the day, which ones can win in the general? And one's proven that and one hasn't.
Listen, Mike, I know that this is going to change quite a bit over the next couple of months, but it's interesting to see the trends and the way they're moving. Always appreciate your insight, and I hope you'll come back soon.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
All right, it's Mike Noble from Noble Predictive Insights, a great read and always a great resource for polls in Arizona. We'll be back here on Before You Vote in just a moment. Coming up, how will the newest ballot initiative attempt to handle illegal border crossings, and is it a good solution for Arizona? Find out next on Before You Vote. Welcome back to Before You Vote. Continuing our conversation with Chuck Coughlin from HighGround, I want to talk about the border issues. Two big things happening this week, same day. You had the House of Representatives in Arizona passing HCR 2060. We'll talk about that going to the ballot. But the president also talked about an executive order and asylum seekers.
Yeah.
Let's start there with this executive order.
Yep.
There are a lot of people that are saying there's not much happening here, not much going on. People on his side of the aisle saying it's significant. What will this do in the election cycle? Does it help him in the election cycle?
It's a little too late. I mean, I think his reputation and the administration's reputation on its failure on the border is very well ensconced in people's minds. We know that as Arizona voters. I look at the Arizona electorate and I say it's the most sophisticated immigration electorate in the country. We've been doing this for over 20 years now. And so I think most people, me included, would say, nice job, too little too late, where you been? Because he gets the reputation after Title 42 got repealed, he lifted all, and that flooded this country. I mean, there's millions of people now in the country as a result of his, so he's now changed the rule. He'll shut it down at, 1,500 people a day. You're going to shut the border down. That should have happened years ago.
And one of the surprise things about it when he said we're going to reduce the number of people that can apply for asylum and enter the country illegally, a lot of people heard that and thought, well, I didn't know you could still apply for asylum if you came in illegally. I think that opened people's eyes.
Yeah.
Do you think that's also someone are going to say that shouldn't be that way either?
Yeah, I mean, I think the asylum process should have been reformed a long time ago.
We all do.
I mean, it is a massive loophole in the American system, rightfully so. I mean, I think we should still be that Statue of Liberty country.
Shining city on the hill.
Absolutely, that we're here for your tired, your poor, for your refugees. But the definition of that, given global patterns of migration now, it's just crazy how many people, and from what, they're not coming from Mexico.
Right.
You know, they're coming from the South America, they're coming from Central America,
All
they're
over
coming
the
from
world.
Afghanistan, they're coming from all over the world seeking American refuge, which is okay, but we need a law. We need something to fix that.
And that's on Congress.
It is, but he admitted today in doing what he did that he could have done something about this a while ago.
Correct.
I remember a conversation I had with McCain, you know, when he was running that last cycle. I said, you got to do something about DACA. You have to do something about immigrants who are in this country, who have been here. And he goes, Obama's going to screw it up. He's going to issue an executive order and take all the air out of the room. Well, that's exactly what happened, and then that DACA issue's been there ever since.
But we've also now created the next generation.
Exactly.
350,000 cases were just closed.
Yeah.
Not people sent home, not people given asylum, but just close the case. So let's move on to HCR 2060, a response from Arizona that is trying to do something, whether it's the right thing or not. Sheriff Daniels in Cochise County concerned about the expense. I talked with Sheriff Rhodes from Yavapai County, head of the Arizona Sheriff's Association. Their big concern is about unfunded mandates. Where do you see this going? What does this do? Does it pass by the voters? And what happens as this election cycle?
I suspect it does pass. It's not going to be by any significant margin because I think there's all the issues you just raised will be brought up during the course of the campaign. And son of 1070, we're going to be back there again on prosecution by the color of your skin. You know, how do you know that somebody's illegal? And are you going to do Joe Arpaio roundups on people? And does this make that legal?
To be fair, I talked with Ben Toma, Speaker of the House.
Yep.
And they said specifically in this, it's probable cause. You have to be able to prove that you saw them cross the border, that this is either video evidence or a cop can prove this. So they're not going after people in schools and businesses.
Right.
They can't. This law precludes it. Do you believe that comes across to the voters?
Well, that's a matter of a campaign. And this is the other big question, is where do they get the resources to run a campaign to create the kind of information you just provided people? Because I don't think the business community is circling around this issue.
They're not.
They've backed away. So where do they come up with the resources to create an informed electorate about that opinion? I'm not clear about, you're going to have to run a campaign on this. I'm pretty clear there's going to be a no campaign on
And there's other two parts of this, which many people agree with. One of them has to do with E-Verify, where the business community is not a big fan of forcing businesses to do this. But the other is on the fentanyl enforcement and enhanced sentencing for fentanyl. Most people would say that needs to be in there.
Yeah.
But those are taking a back seat.
Yeah, those are taking a back seat. I'm totally with you on the E-Verify issue. That's something that, you know, that goes back to Russell Pierce back in the day. We, as a state, made that a federal issue, but now we've seen enforcement, lacking on that. And so it's a significant tool to control the hiring of illegal aliens and create a process by which you have to create immigration law.
That's why we bring him in. He's an expert, been doing this for many years right here in Arizona. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back to Before You Vote. Thank you to political strategist Chuck Coughlin and Mike Noble from Noble Predictive Insights for being a part of today's show. Now remember, if you miss an interview or want to rewatch any of them, head over to cw7az.com/vote. You'll find links and voter resources such as how to register to vote and candidate information. The primary election is coming up on July 30th. Thanks for joining us this week. We'll see you next Sunday right here on Before You Vote. For a list of voter resources, visit cw7arizona.com.